Welcome to Will of Fire Stories, the place where legends are rewritten, destinies are broken, and the will of fire burns beyond canon. Here, we explore what-if timelines where Naruto rises above fate. Power has no limits, and bonds turn into empires. This is not the story you know. This is the story that could have been. Chapter 1. The Shattering of the Seal. The air in the Hidden Leaf Village was thick with the scent of ozone and burning wood. Naruto Uzumaki stood atop the carved head of the fourth Hokage, his breathing heavy, his orange jumpsuit tattered and stained with the grime of a battle that had pushed him beyond his limits. Below, the village was a mosaic of chaos, but it wasn't the destruction of pain or the threat of Madara that weighed on him now. It was a strange, rhythmic pulsing in his chest, a vibration that resonated not from his heart, but from the seal on his abdomen. "Kurama," Naruto whispered, his voice cracking. "What is this? It feels like the seal is dissolving." Quote, inside the subconscious sewer of Naruto's mind, the great nine-tailed fox paced behind the golden bars. But the bars weren't solid anymore. They were shimmering, turning into translucent threads of white light. "This isn't the Reaper Death Seal's doing, Naruto," Kurama's voice boomed, though it lacked its usual malice. It sounded almost apprehensive. He chakra you've gathered, the sage energy, the fragments of the other tailed beasts, and that strange rift we touched in the dimension of the Otsutsuki, it's caused a chain reaction. We aren't just breaking a seal, we're breaking the world." Quote, suddenly, a blinding flash of violet light erupted from Naruto's navel. The sky above Konoha didn't just darken, it fractured. Shards of reality fell like glass, revealing glimpses of other skies, some blood red, some filled with floating islands, some metallic and cold. Naruto screamed as his body began to undergo a terrifying metamorphosis. The golden oot of his nine tails chakra mode didn't just glow, it expanded, stretching across the horizon. His whiskers deepened, and his eyes shifted, no longer just the cross pupil of the toad sage and the fox, but a swirling kaleidoscope of every color imaginable. "Naruto," Sakura's voice echoed from far below, but her voice was stretching, slowing down until it was a low, guttural moan. Time was fracturing. "Hold on, brat," Kurama roared. "The multiverse is reacting to your essence. You aren't just a ninja anymore. You're becoming a singularity." The force of the expansion was violent. Naruto felt his consciousness splintering. Reaching out into the void, he saw versions of himself that never became ninjas, versions where he was the villain, and versions where he never existed at all. But more than that, he felt a pull, a magnetic, irresistible attraction to the powerful feminine energies scattered across these infinite realities. It wasn't lust, it was a cosmic alignment. The harem jutsu he had joked about as a child was no longer a prank. It was a latent, divine blueprint of his soul, the ability to harmonize and unite disparate forces through the bond of his own spirit. As the village of Konoha vanished into a swirl of white light, Naruto felt a soft hand touch his cheek. It wasn't Sakura, or Hinata, or anyone he knew. It was a presence that felt like the beginning of time itself. "The king has awakened," a voice whispered in his mind. The white light consumed everything. When Naruto opened his eyes, he wasn't in the elemental nations anymore. He was floating in a palace made of crystallized starlight, suspended in the center of a swirling nebula. Standing before him were figures that defied logic, warriors in strange armor, goddesses with hair made of fire, and queens of empires that spanned galaxies. He looked down at his hands. They were glowing with a soft, eternal radiance. The whiskers on his face were now marks of divine royalty. "Where am I?" Naruto asked, his voice echoing with the power of 1,000 storms. A woman stepped forward, her eyes glowing with the same violet hue as the rift. "You are at the nexus, Naruto Uzumaki. The multiverse is dying of discord, and you are the only one with the soul capable of binding it back together. You are the Eternal King, the bridge between all worlds." Naruto looked out at the infinite portals opening around him. He felt the weight of his new destiny. He wasn't just a protector of one village anymore. He was the anchor for all existence. "If that's what it takes to save everyone," Naruto said, a determined smirk finally breaking through his shock, "then I guess I've got a lot of work to do." Believe it, the throne beneath him surged with power, sending a golden pulse through the multiverse, signaling the arrival of its new sovereign. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2. The First Alignment. The Palace of Crystallized Starlight, known to the ancient cosmic watchers as the Ethelgard, hummed with a frequency that vibrated in Naruto's very marrow. He stood at the edge of a balcony that overlooked not a city, but a swirling vortex of nebulas, each one a galaxy, each spark of light a potential world. The transition from the mud and blood of the shinobi world to this ethereal throne was jarring, yet Naruto felt a strange, haunting familiarity with the air here. It tasted of ozone and ancient secrets. "Don't get too comfortable, Naruto." Kurama's voice echoed, now clearer than ever. The fox was no longer caged. He sat in a massive, open courtyard within Naruto's psyche, his 9 tails brushing against the walls of his host's expanding soul. "This, Eternal King, business isn't a title, it's a burden. You're holding the fabric of reality together by sheer force of will." The woman who had greeted him, a celestial being named Alara with skin the color of twilight and hair that drifted like smoke, walked toward him. Her footsteps made no sound. "The discord began long before your arrival, King Uzumaki. The barriers between the dimensions have grown thin. Darkness bleeds from the cracks, entities that feast on the isolation of worlds. They fear the Union." The Union. Naruto turned, his golden cloak carrying like a dying candle before stabilizing into a brilliant, steady sun. "You mean this Harem King stuff? Look, I've always been a bit of a prankster, but I don't think I'm the guy to, marry the whole multiverse." Alara's expression remained serene, though a hint of a smile touched her lips. "It is not about conquest or carnal desire, though the bond of the heart is its strongest catalyst. It is about alignment. Each world has a pillar, a woman of immense spiritual or physical power who embodies the essence of her reality. When you form a bond with a pillar, her world is anchored to yours. It is protected, it is saved from the void." Before Naruto could protest further, a violent tremor shook the palace. One of the many portals surrounding the balcony flared a sickly, necrotic green. "The first breach," Alara whispered, her eyes widening. "The world of the silver moon is being consumed. If its pillar falls, that entire timeline will be erased." Naruto didn't hesitate. The instinct to save, the same instinct that had driven him to face Gaara, Pain, and Kagaya, surged through him. "How do I get there?" "Jump," she said. Naruto leapt. He didn't fall, he tore through space. The sensation was like being pulled through a straw and then exploding into a new atmosphere. He slammed into a cobblestone street with the force of a meteor, kicking up a cloud of dust and debris. As the dust settled, Naruto looked up. He was in a city that looked like a gothic nightmare. High, pointed spires reached toward a moon that was being choked by black, oily tentacles. The air smelled of sulfur and fear. In the center of the square, surrounded by hulking, faceless monsters made of shadows, stood a woman. She wore silver armor that was cracked and stained. Her hair, as white as the moon above, was matted with blood. She held a rapier that glowed with a flickering blue light, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She was beautiful, but her eyes were filled with the cold resignation of someone waiting for the end. "Get back," she screamed as a shadow beast lunged. Naruto moved faster than her eyes could follow. He didn't use a kunai, he simply caught the beast's head in his hand and flared his chakra. The shadow disintegrated into ash instantly. He stood before her, his orange and gold silhouette a stark contrast to the gloom of her world. "You the pillar of this place." The warrior queen blinked, her sword lowering slightly. "I am Arturia of the Silver Moon." "Who are you? An angel? A demon?" "Neither," Naruto said, reaching out a hand. "Just a guy who doesn't like seeing people fight alone. I'm Naruto Uzumaki, and I'm here to anchor your world." Arturia looked at his hand, then at the sky where the tentacles were retreating from the sudden radiance Naruto emitted. She felt a pull toward him, not just a need for rescue, but a deep, soul-level recognition. Her heart, which had been frozen in the isolation of her duty, began to thrum in sync with his. As she took his hand, a pillar of golden light shot into the sky, shattering the shadows and mending the moon. The mark of a swirling whirlpool appeared on the back of Arturia's hand, and Naruto felt his own power grow. His connection to the multiverse solidifying. "The first bond is struck," Kurama chuckled. "Only a few million more to go, kid." Naruto looked at Arturia, who was now staring at him with a mixture of awe and newfound devotion. He realized then that Alara was right. This wasn't just about saving lives, it was about building a family that spanned across the stars. "Well," Naruto grinned, one down. "Who's next?" End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3. The Forge of the Phoenix. The transition back to the Ethelgerd was instantaneous, but Naruto wasn't alone. Arturia of the Silver Moon stood beside him, her silver armor shimmering as the palace's celestial light began to mend the cracks in her plate. She looked around the infinite expanse of the Nexus, her hand still resting in Naruto's. The bond between them felt like a humming wire. A constant stream of reassurance and strength flowing both ways. My world, it feels stable for the first time in centuries, Arturia whispered, her voice reflecting a profound sense of relief. The weight of the void is gone. That's because you've shifted the weight onto him. Kurama's voice vibrated through the floor of the palace, though he remained invisible to Arturia. And he's a glutton for punishment. Alara appeared from the shadows of a great crystalline pillar. The silver moon is anchored. But the balance is precarious, King Naruto. To the east of the Great Weave, a world of fire is collapsing under its own heat. The pillar there is losing control of her essence. If she detonates, she will take 3 neighboring realities with her. Naruto wiped a smudge of soot from his cheek. No rest for the weary, huh? Lead the way. Alara gestured toward a portal that burned with a fierce, crimson intensity. It didn't look like a gateway, it looked like the mouth of a sun. This is the realm of Ignis. The pillar is Solara, the Phoenix Queen. Her heart has been poisoned by the Despair Eaters. She believes the only way to cleanse her world is to burn it to ashes. I'm good at talking people out of blowing things up, Naruto said, stepping toward the flame. He looked back at Arturia. Stay here, it's gonna get hot. Arturia tightened her grip on her rapier. I am your first blade, Naruto. Where the king goes, the silver moon follows. Naruto smiled, a genuine, fox-like grin, and the two dived into the inferno. They emerged onto a landscape of floating obsidian islands suspended over a sea of white-hot magma. The sky was a bruised purple, choked by ash. In the distance, atop a volcano that pierced the clouds, a woman stood draped in wings of literal flame. Every beat of her wings sent shockwaves of heat that threatened to melt the very ground. Solara was beautiful in a terrifying way. Her skin was a deep bronze, etched with glowing orange veins. And her eyes were 2 pits of sun fire. She was screaming, a sound of pure agony that resonated through the spiritual plane. Around her, shadowy wraiths, the Despair Eaters, vultured close, whispering into her ears. Feeding on her isolation. It's too much. Solara wailed, her fire turning a sickly, dark red. The loneliness of the flame. I will burn it all. Hey, Queenie. Naruto's voice cut through the roar of the lava. He propelled himself across the islands using a burst of chakra, landing on the slopes of the volcano. Arturia followed, using her lunar energy to create a coaling mist that shielded them from the worst of the heat. The Despair Eaters turned, their faceless heads tilting. They lunged at Naruto, but he didn't even draw a weapon. He simply unleashed a wave of pure, unfiltered empathy, a golden fox shockwave. The wraiths hissed and evaporated, unable to withstand the warmth of a soul that had known true loneliness and conquered it. Solara turned her gaze on him. Who are you to interrupt the end? I'm Naruto Uzumaki, he said, walking calmly through the rain of sparks. And I know what it's like to have a power inside you that feels like it's gonna eat you alive. I know what it's like to want to burn the world because it won't look at you. Solara paused, her wings flickering. You carry a sun within you. I carry a lot of things, Naruto said, stopping just feet away from her. The heat was searing his jumpsuit, but he didn't flinch. But mostly, I carry the hope of everyone who believes in me. You don't have to burn alone, Solara. You can be part of something bigger. A union where your fire doesn't destroy, it protects. He held out his hand, the same way he had for Arturia. Solara looked at his hand, then at Arturia, who nodded with silent encouragement. The Queen of Fire reached out, her fingers trembling. As their skin touched, the dark red fire vanished, replaced by a brilliant, purifying gold. The volcano stilled. The sea of magma below settled into a calm, glowing orange. The mark of the whirlpool manifested on Solara's shoulder, glowing like a brand of molten gold. She collapsed into Naruto's arms, her flames softening into a gentle warmth. The heat, it doesn't hurt anymore, she sobbed into his chest. That's because you're not holding it all by yourself, Naruto murmured. 2 pillars were now bound. The palace of Ethelgerd expanded, a new wing of obsidian and gold forming to accommodate the essence of Ignis. Naruto felt the power within him double, the burden of the multiverse becoming a bit easier to see. As he shared the weight with those he saved. End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4. The Deep Silence. The Ethelgerd was no longer a lonely crystalline spire. With the addition of Solara's influence, the air carried a pleasant warmth. And the halls were illuminated by the soft, rhythmic pulsing of a dormant sun. Arturia and Solara stood on either side of Naruto, a silent guard of silver and flame. Naruto, however, was staring at a portal that didn't glow or burn. It was a flat, matte black, a hole in reality that seemed to swallow the very light around it. "This is the abyss of Nephthys," Alara said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It is a world of water and silence. But it is not a peaceful silence. The pillar there, Empress Mizuki, has fallen into a catatonic grief. Her world is drowning in an endless, freezing ocean. If her heart stops beating, the tides of the abyss will overflow and flood the Great Weave, extinguishing the fires of Ignis in the light of the silver moon." Naruto felt a chill run down his spine. Grief. What happened? She was the guardian of a billion souls, Alara explained. She watched them all fade as her son died. She used her own life force to keep the water breathable. But the isolation has finally broken her. Naruto tightened his forehead protector. "I'm going in. Alone this time. If it's a world of grief, too many people might make it worse. I need to talk to her, soul to soul." Arturia stepped forward, but Solara placed a hand on her silver pauldron. "He is the king of hearts, Arturia. Some battles are fought with swords, and some with silence." Naruto stepped into the black portal. He didn't fall, he sank. The transition was like plunging into an ice bath. He was deep underwater, but the pressure didn't crush him. His divine chakra formed a thin, golden skin around him, providing oxygen and warmth. Above, there was no surface, only a dim, emerald glow. Below, there was an endless trench. In the center of the abyss sat a throne of bone and coral. A woman with skin as pale as marble and long, flowing hair the color of ink sat motionless. Her eyes were closed, and a crown of black pearls rested on her brow. This was Mizuki. Surrounding her were the echoes, transparent, ghostly figures of the people she had lost, circling her in a dance of eternal sorrow. As Naruto approached, the water grew heavy, pushing against him like lead. The echoes turned, their hollow eyes weeping dark ink. "Go away," 1,000 voices whispered in his mind. "Let us sleep in the cold. Let the world end in silence." "I can't do that," Naruto said, his voice bubbling into the water but carrying perfectly through the spiritual link. "I've spent my whole life fighting to be heard. I'm not gonna let a whole world go quiet just because it's hurting." Mizuki's eyes snapped open. They were entirely black, devoid of pupils. "You shine too brightly, little sun. Your light is a lie. Everything ends. Everything sinks." She raised a hand, and the water around Naruto froze instantly, trapping him in a massive block of black ice. But Naruto didn't struggle. He let the cold seep in. He thought of the swing set outside the academy, the cold stares of the villagers, the years he spent eating ramen alone in a dark apartment. He let her feel his own history of silence. The black ice began to crack, not from heat, but from resonance. Naruto's chakra shifted, turning a deep, empathetic blue. He moved through the ice as if it were silk and swam to her, stopping inches from her face. "It's not a lie," Naruto whispered, placing his hand over her cold heart. "The pain is real, but so is the fact that you're still here. You kept them alive in your memory, didn't you? That's not a burden, Mizuki. That's a gift." Mizuki's black eyes flickered. A single tear escaped, clear and bright against the dark water. As it fell, the echoes stopped their dancing. They began to glow with a soft, white light, turning from ghosts of grief into spirits of peace. "I am so tired of being alone," she choked out. "You aren't," Naruto said. He pulled her into a hug, his golden warmth melting the icy currents of the abyss. "You're part of my pack now. And we never leave anyone behind." The mark of the whirlpool appeared on the center of Mizuki's forehead, shining like a lighthouse. The dark, freezing waters of her world began to shimmer, turning into a vibrant, life-sustaining turquoise. Back in the Ethelgard, a massive fountain of endless, crystal-clear water erupted in the central plaza, harmonizing with the heat of the phoenix and the light of the moon. Naruto emerged from the portal carrying Mizuki, who was now breathing steadily, her ink-black hair trailing behind her like a royal cape. 3. Kurama noted, his tail swishing in satisfaction. "The foundation is setting, Naruto. The king's court is beginning to take shape." Naruto looked at his 3 queens, the blade, the flame, and the sea. He felt the multiverse shifting, the cracks in reality beginning to knit together under the weight of these new bonds. But in the distance, a darker portal was opening, one that smelled of rusted metal and ancient, forgotten technology. End of Chapter 4. Chapter 5. The Clockwork Heart. The Ethelgard vibrated with a new, mechanical rhythm. Alongside the crackle of Solara's fire and the splash of Mizuki's fountains, a steady, metallic ticking echoed through the halls. Naruto stood before the newest rift, which pulsed with a jagged, neon-green electricity. The air emanating from it smelled of ozone, burnt oil, and cold copper. This is the sector of Chronos, Alara explained. Her celestial form flickering as the mechanical interference toyed with her essence. A world that traded its soul for efficiency. They automated everything, even their emotions. But the Great Gear has jammed. The world is stuck in a localized time loop, repeating its final hour of existence over and over. A time loop. Naruto scratched his head. That sounds like a real pain. Who's the pillar? Unit X-99, known as the Empress of Logic, Mizuki said, stepping forward, her turquoise robes trailing water that never dried. She was once a woman of flesh, but she replaced her heart with a core of pure calculation to save her people from a plague. Now, she is more machine than human, and she cannot see the path to salvation because it isn't logical. Naruto nodded, his eyes hardening. Logic only gets you so far. Sometimes you gotta bet on the impossible. He stepped through the rift and was immediately hit by a sensory overload. He was in a city of towering chrome. Skyscrapers that pierced a sky of shifting digital code. Everything was gray and silver, illuminated only by the harsh glow of neon signs. Around him, the citizens, half human, half machine, walked in perfect, synchronized patterns. Suddenly, a bell tolled, and the sky turned red. A massive explosion rocked the horizon, and then, snap, everything reset. The people were back in their positions, walking the same paths. In the center of the city stood a spire of shifting gears. At the top sat X-99. She was stunningly beautiful, but her skin was a matte white synthetic material, and her eyes were glowing sapphire shutters. Wires ran from her back into the core of the city. Query: why does a non-synchronized entity interfere with the loop? Her voice was a melodic, multi-layered chime. Because the loop is a cage, Naruto said, using his body flicker technique to appear on the platform before her. I'm Naruto Uzumaki. I'm here to fix the gear. Illogical, X-99 replied, her eyes scanning him. The loop prevents the final collapse. By repeating the hour, the population survives. Total erasure is the only alternative. Your presence is an anomaly that must be purged. She raised her arm. Why? CH transformed into a high-frequency energy cannon. A beam of concentrated plasma roared toward Naruto. He didn't dodge. He entered his six-path sage mode, catching the beam with his bare hand and crushing the energy into nothingness. Survival isn't just breathing, X-99, Naruto said, walking toward her. Each step he took sent a pulse of golden chakra through the floor, disrupting the digital floor. It's growing, it's feeling, it's moving forward even if you're scared of what's next. Forward leads to death, she countered, her processors whirring loudly. I have calculated 10 billion scenarios. In all of them, the sun of this sector dies. The loop is the only mercy. Then your math is wrong, Naruto challenged. He was standing right in front of her now. He reached out and placed his hand not on her head, but over the pulsing blue core in her chest. You're trying to calculate the future using only what you know. You aren't accounting for us. He poured his chakra into her, not as an attack, but as a memory. He showed her the warmth of the ramen shop, the laughter of his friends, and the fierce, illogical love he felt for the world. He showed her the bonds he had already formed with Arturia, Solara, and Mizuki. The blue core in X-99's chest began to glow white. Her synthetic skin flushed with a sudden, artificial warmth. For the first time in centuries, the Empress of Logi. C felt a surge of error, an emotion that defied her programming. Error, error, hope detected, she whispered. Her sapphire eyes softened, turning into a deep, human blue. The calculation has changed. The great gear at the center of the world suddenly turned. The red sky shattered, revealing a real dawn. The time loop broke, and for the first time, the seconds began to tick forward into an unknown future. The mark of the whirlpool appeared on X-99's neck, glowing with a neon brilliance. The mechanical spire began to reshape itself, becoming a monument of silver and light. X-99 stood up, her movements no longer robotic, but fluid and graceful. She looked at Naruto, her internal fan slowing down as her heart found its rhythm. You are the prime variable, Naruto Uzumaki. I am aligned. Back at the Ethelgard, the palace's architecture shifted again. A tower of gleaming chrome and shifting gears rose from the western wing, providing the nexus with a perfect, calculated stability. Naruto stood with his 4 queens, feeling the immense power of the multiverse flowing through him. But as X-99 integrated her systems with the palace, her eyes suddenly went wide. "King Naruto," she said, her voice urgent. "My sensors have just detected a breach in the prime reality. A shadow is moving toward the world of your birth. The origin of the Uzumaki is under siege." Naruto's blood ran cold. The multiverse was vast, but his home was his heart. Then we stopped playing defense. It's time to show them what the king can do. End of Chapter 5. Chapter 6. The Shadow of the Origin. The air in the Ethelgard turned frigid, a sharp contrast to the mechanical warmth of X-99's integration. Naruto's heart hammered against his ribs, not with fear, but with a protective rage that made the Elden chakra of his cloak flare into jagged peaks. The prime reality, the elemental nations, the place where Iruka-sensei's smile lived and the Ichiraku broth simmered, was in the crosshairs. "Show me," Naruto commanded. X-99 waved a hand, and a massive holographic screen flickered into existence in the center of the plaza. The image was grainy, distorted by a creeping, oily darkness. It showed Konoha, but it was a Konoha he barely recognized. The great stone faces were weeping a black, tar-like substance. The streets were silent, the villagers frozen in place like statues made of ash. In the center of the village, hovering above the Hokage mansion, was a figure draped in robes of shifting void. It wasn't an Otsutsuki, it was something older, a parasite of the multiverse that fed on the origin of heroes. "The Nile," Ilara whispered, her face pale. "It seeks to erase the root of your existence. If your home is consumed, you will become a king without a foundation. You will vanish, and the union will shatter." "Not happening," Naruto growled. He turned to his 4 queens. Arturia was sharpening her blade, Solara's hair was a literal bonfire, Mizuki was calling the tides of the Ethelgard's fountains. And X-99 was recalibrating her internal weapon systems. "This is my home. I'm going in fast and hard. I need you all to hold the anchor here. If the Nile tries to jump to another world while I'm busy, stop it." "Naruto," Arturia stepped forward, her eyes fierce. "A king does not fight his most personal war alone. Let us at least provide the opening." Naruto looked at them, his blade, his flame, his sea. And his logic. He realized they weren't just anchors, they were his family now. "All right, we drop in, we clear the corruption, and we save the leaf. But stay sharp. This thing eats stories, and I've got a long one." They dived into the rift. The transition back to the prime reality felt like hitting a wall of wet wool. The vibrant colors of Naruto's world had been bleached away. As they landed in the middle of the Chunin exam arena, the silence was deafening. The Nile turned its hooded head toward them. It had no face, only a swirling galaxy of dead stars where a countenance should be. "The anomaly returns," it spoke, its voice sounding like grinding stones. "You have built a house of cards across the stars, Uzumaki. I shall pull the bottom card. The only thing you're pulling is a short straw." Naruto roared. He didn't hold back. He entered the 6 paths, eternal sovereign mode. His golden shroud expanded, manifesting 4 massive avatar arms made of pure, white-hot chakra. Solara took to the sky, raining down purifying sun fire that burned away the black tar from the buildings. Mizuki slammed her palms onto the ground, calling forth the hidden springs beneath Konoha to wash away the ash. Arturia was a blur of silver, her rapier slicing through the shadow minions the Nile summoned. X-99 stood at Naruto's back, her eyes scanning the Nile's frequency. "King Naruto, its core is out of phase with this reality. You cannot hit it with physical force. You must strike it with the weight of your bonds." "I hear you," Naruto shouted. He gathered chakra, but it wasn't a Rasengan. It was a sphere of shimmering, multicolored light, the combined essence of the 4 queens. He charged. The Nile raised a hand, creating a wall of absolute nothingness. "Love is a flicker. Silence is eternal," the creature hissed. "Then let's see you handle the roar." Naruto slammed the sphere into the void wall. The collision sent a shockwave that cleared the clouds for 100 miles. Naruto felt the Nile trying to erase his memories, trying to make him forget the swing, forget Sasuke, forget the girls standing behind him. But the marks of the whirlpool on his queen's bodies glowed like beacons, tethering his mind to the present. With a final, guttural shout, Naruto forced the sphere through. The Nile's form began to crack, the stolen colors of the world leaking out of its seams. "This world made me who I am," Naruto yelled, his fist connecting with the center of the Nile's face. And I'm the king who says you're finished. The Nile exploded in a burst of white light. The darkness vanished. The black tar on the Hokage faces dissolved, revealing the stone beneath. The villagers began to blink, the color returning to their skin as if waking from a long, dreamless sleep. Naruto stood in the center of the crater, panting. The world felt right again. He looked up and saw Sakura, Kakashi, and the others running toward him, their faces filled with confusion and joy. But as he looked at his queens, he saw them beginning to fade. They were out of sync with this timeline. Go back, Naruto told them, his heart aching. I'll follow in a second. I just need to say. I need to see them one last time. X99 nodded, her blue eyes soft. The prime reality is secure. We will wait for you at the throne. They vanished in a swirl of light. Naruto turned to his old friends, but as he did, he felt a new, strange pull from a different corner of the multiverse, a world that smelled of high seas adventure and fruit. The work never ends, does it, Kurama? You're the one who wanted to be Hokage, kid, the fox chuckled. This is just a bigger office. End of Chapter 6. Chapter 7. The Grand Line of Fate. The Edelgard did not remain in the prime reality. As Naruto stood amidst the cheering crowd of Konoha, the very air began to ripple like the surface of a pond. He barely had time to wave a final goodbye to Kakashi and Sakura before the tether the Eternal King pulled him back into the celestial slipstream. The prime reality is stabilizing, X99 reported as Naruto materialized back on the star glass dais. Her sapphire eyes were cycling through data streams. However, the destruction of the Nile has sent a ripple across the Great Sea dimension. A world dominated by water and disparate islands is experiencing a tectonic shift in its power balance. Naruto adjusted his cloak, which now bore subtle silver, crimson, and turquoise patterns along the hem. A world of islands. Sounds like Mizuki's place. No, Mizuki said, stepping forward, her expression grave. The abyss was a world of depth and silence. This world, it is a world of chaos, freedom, and a sea that never ends. The pillar there is not a queen of a throne, but a queen of the horizon. Alara gestured, and a new portal opened. It smelled of salt spray, citrus, and aged wood. Go to the Grand Line, Naruto. The pillar there is Boa Hancock, the Empress of the Amazons. Her heart is a fortress of stone, hardened by a past of cruelty. If she does not align, her worlds the power they call Haki, will shatter, leaving her people defenseless against the encroaching dark. Naruto didn't need to be told twice. A fortress of stone, I've broken down a few of those. He dived through the salt-scented rift. He emerged several thousand feet in the air, the sun blindingly bright. Below him stretched a vast, sparkling blue ocean dotted with strange, fantastical islands. Directly beneath his fall was a massive ship shaped like a perfume bottle, flanked by two enormous sea serpents. Heads up, Naruto yelled, righting himself in midair and landing with a soft thud on the deck of the perfume Yuta. The deck was instantly flooded with women warriors, all pointing bows tipped with glowing energy at him. In the center, reclining on a large snake, was a woman of such staggering beauty that the very air seemed to bow to her. She looked at Naruto with a gaze of absolute disdain. Her head tilted so far back she was looking down her nose at him. A man, she hissed, her voice like velvet and ice. On the ship of the Kuja. You have committed a sin that only death can atone for. I, Boa Hancock, decree it. Whoa, hold on. Naruto raised his hands. I'm not here for trouble. I'm Naruto Uzumaki, and I've got a message about the world ending. You're a pillar, Hancock. I am the most beautiful woman in the world, she countered, her hand forming a heart shape. And because I am beautiful, I am forgiven for anything, including your execution. Mero mellow. A beam of pink light shot toward Naruto. Usually, this turned anyone with even a hint of lust in their heart to stone. Naruto stood his ground. The beam hit him and nothing happened. Hancock's jaw dropped. What? Why are you not stone? Do you not find me beautiful? Naruto looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the beauty, sure, but he also saw the same flicker of a trapped, terrified child he had seen in the eyes of his other queens. You're beautiful, yeah, but I've seen the stars and the depths of the abyss. Physical beauty doesn't impress me as much as what's inside. And right now, inside you, I see a wall of stone that's starting to crack. Hancock recoiled as if struck. How dare you? You know nothing of my past. I know what it's like to be a slave to a fate you didn't choose, Naruto said. his voice dropping to a low, resonant tone that vibrated with the power of the Ethelgard. I know about the marks people try to hide. The atmosphere shifted. The sea serpents groaned. A dark, purple mist, the remnants of the Nile's corruption, began to rise from the waves, forming into massive, ghostly hands that reached for the ship. The darkness is here, Hancock. Naruto shouted, his golden chakra erupting. You can try to fight it with your pride, or you can join a union that will protect your sisters forever. Hancock looked at the darkness, then at the man standing before her, who didn't look at her with lust, but with the eyes of a peer, a king. She felt a warmth in her chest, a melting of the ice that had protected her heart for so long. If I accept this union, she whispered, will I truly never be a slave again? I'll be your shield, and you'll be my empress, Naruto promised, extending his hand. No one touches what's mine. Hancock didn't hesitate. She stepped forward and took his hand. As their fingers locked, a pulse of Conqueror's Haki infused with Six Paths chakra exploded outward, vaporizing the dark mist in an instant. The mark of the whirlpool appeared on the small of her back, glowing with a fierce, royal violet. Hancock let out a breath she felt she'd been holding for years. She leaned her head against Naruto's chest, her pride finally finding a place to rest. Then I am yours, Naruto Uzumaki, she murmured. And the seven seas are yours as well. Back at the Ethelgard, a new wing grew, a tropical paradise of white sands and marble villas. Surrounded by a sea that contained the spirit of adventure. Naruto stood with 5 queens now. The union was growing, but so was the attention of the multiverse's true antagonists, the Council of Shards. Who watched the kings rise with growing envy. End of Chapter 7. Chapter 8. The Shadow of the Council. The Ethelgard had transformed. What was once a cold, crystalline spire was now a sprawling metropolis of dimensions. To the north, the Gothic spires of Arturia's silver moon caught the light. To the south, Solara's volcanic peaks glowed with a protective warmth. To the east, the neon towers of X-99's sector hummed with data, and to the west, the tropical breezes of Hancock's sea mingled with the turquoise mists of Mizuki's abyss. Naruto stood in the center of the Grand Plaza, his orange and gold cloak now heavy with the weight of 5 worlds. He wasn't just a ninja, he was a focal point of existence. But as he looked at his hands, he noticed a faint, gray tremor in his fingers. The strain is showing, a voice spoke from the shadows of a marble archway. It wasn't Alara. A man stepped forward, dressed in robes that seemed to be made of shifting sand. His eyes were blank, white orbs. I am Nimnose, a herald of the Council of Shards. You are playing a dangerous game, Uzumaki. The Council of Shards. Naruto's eyes narrowed. I've heard that name popping up. You guys the ones who let these worlds fall into the void in the first place. We are the architects of balance, Nimnose replied coldly. A multiverse is meant to be a collection of isolated fragments. By binding them together into a union, you are creating a superorganism. If you fall, Naruto Uzumaki, every world you have anchored will die with you. You have made yourself a single point of failure for trillions of lives. Then I just won't fall, Naruto said, his voice flat and determined. The council has decided to test your foundation, Nimnose said, his form beginning to dissolve into sand. They have opened a rift to the world of the Black Rose. It is a reality where the pillar has already been corrupted. She is not a victim waiting for a king, she is a predator waiting for a feast. The herald vanished, and a rift tore open in the middle of the plaza. It didn't smell of salt or ozone. It smelled of rotting flowers and ancient, metallic blood. Before Naruto could move, Arturia and Hancock were at his side. We go with you, Hancock declared, her eyes flashing with a protective fire. No, predator, touches our king. No, Naruto said, his gaze fixed on the dark rift. Nimnose said this is a test of my foundation. If I take you all in there and it's a trap, the Ethelgard is defenseless. I go alone, but keep the connection open. If I call, you pull me back. Naruto stepped into the rift of the Black Rose. He landed in a world of perpetual twilight. The ground was covered in thick, thorny vines that pulsed with a dark purple light. In the distance stood a castle made of obsidian, draped in roses that were as black as the void. As he approached the castle, the thorns moved like snakes, trying to trip him. Naruto burned them away with a flick of his chakra, but they regrew instantly. He reached the throne room, where a woman sat upon a chair of twisted wood. She was breathtaking, but her beauty was sharp, like a glass shard. Her hair was a deep violet, and he wore a dress of black silk that seemed to absorb the light. This was Alara's dark mirror, Kuria, the Queen of Thorns. The Eternal King, she purred, her voice echoing in the hollow chamber. The council told me you would be appetizing. They think your union is a noble cause. I think it's just a bigger buffet. She stood, and the thorns in the room rose like a tidal wave. I don't need a savior, Naruto. I need your spark to fuel my eternal night. She moved with a speed that rivaled Naruto's body flicker. She didn't use ninjutsu, she used the very fabric of her reality. Every time Naruto tried to strike, the air itself turned into thorns. He found himself being pushed back, the dark energy of her world beginning to sap his golden shroud. You're lonely, Naruto said, parrying a thorn whip with a chakra blade. I can feel it. This predator act is just a way to make sure no one can get close enough to hurt you. Silence. Kuria screamed, her face contorting. I am the night. I am the end of all things. She lunged, her hand glowing with a necrotic rot. But Naruto didn't dodge. He opened his arms. The rot touched his chest, searing his skin, but he didn't flinch. He grabbed her wrists and pulled her close. You want to eat my spark? Naruto whispered, his eyes glowing with the fierce blue of the fox. Then take it, take all of it, see if you can handle the weight of 5 worlds and the love of 5 queens. He unleashed the full floodgate of his bond energy. He didn't fight her, he overwhelmed her with the sheer, crushing reality of connection. He showed her Arturia's loyalty, Solara's warmth, Mizuki's peace, X-99's hope, and Hancock's devotion. Kuria's eyes widened, the darkness in them began to shatter. She tried to pull away, but the light was too much. The thorns in the room began to bloom, turning from black to a vibrant, glowing crimson. It's too much, she gasped, her body trembling. I've been in the dark for so long. Then come into the light, Naruto said. The mark of the whirlpool appeared on her throat, shaped like a rose in bloom. The obsidian castle shattered, turning into a garden of eternal spring. Kuria collapsed against him, the thorns on her dress softening into silk. Naruto looked up at the twilight sky, which was now filled with stars. He had passed the council's test, but he knew this was only the beginning. They had tried to break him with a predator, and he had turned her into a protector. He returned to the Ethelgard with Kuria at his side. 6 queens now stood in his court, but as they gathered, X-99's eyes flickered with a warning. The Council of Shards is moving, King Naruto. They are no longer testing you. They are mobilizing a crusade. End of Chapter 8. Chapter 9. The Crusade of Shards. The Ethelgard did not tremble from a physical blow, but from a conceptual one. The very edges of the palace, the marble cliffs of the Kuja docks and the chrome towers of the clockwork sector, began to fray, turning into static. High above the central spire, the sky didn't crack, it unzipped, revealing a dimension of pure, sterile white. The crusade has begun, X-99 announced, her voice overlapping with 100 diagnostic alarms. The Council of Shards is deploying, the erasers, conceptual warriors designed to reset realities to their, pure, isolated states. They are not killing us, they are undoing us. Naruto stood on the highest balcony, his 6 queens flanking him. Kuria, the newest addition, gripped a vine of crimson roses that crackled with a newfound, protective energy. They think they can prune my garden, she hissed. I've spent eons in the dark. I'm not going back. From the white void above, hundreds of figures descended. They were featureless, humanoid shapes made of polished marble, carrying spears that hummed with the sound of 1,000 deleted memories. They didn't scream, they moved in a silence so absolute it hurt the ears. Listen up, Naruto's voice boomed, amplified by the spiritual resonance of the Ethelgard. They're coming for our home. They want to put everyone back in their boxes, alone and afraid. We show them that once you've found a family, you don't let it go. The battle for the Nexus erupted. Solara took to the skies, her phoenix wings spanning the width of the plaza. She met the first wave of erasers with a blast of sun fire, but the marble warriors simply absorbed the heat. They have no souls to burn, she shouted. Then we strike the form. Arturia cried. She leapt into the fray, her silver rapier moving like a needle through silk. Behind her, Hank unleashed a slave arrow that turned the marble figures into actual, unmoving stone. Mizuki raised the tides of the central fountain, creating a whirlpool that dragged the erasers into the crushing depths of the abyss. Naruto moved like a golden ghost. He was everywhere at once, using his multi-dimensional clones to intercept the erasers at every breach. But for every 10 he destroyed, 20 more emerged from the white void. They're attacking the anchor points. X-99 warned, her hands moving through holographic displays. They're targeting the pillars directly. If they touch you, they'll sever your bond to Naruto. One eraser, larger than the rest and glowing with a faint blue light, landed directly in front of Naruto. It didn't use a spear. It reached out a hand, and Naruto felt memory of his first ramen bowl with Iruka-sensei begin to fade. Hey, that's mine, Naruto roared. He didn't use a Rasengan. He used the Union Burst. He reached out his hands, and his 6 queens channeled their essence into him. The silver of the moon, the fire of the phoenix, the depth of the sea, the logic of the machine, the pride of the empress, and the thorns of the rose converged into Naruto's palm. A sphere of pure, prismatic light formed, a multiverse Rasengan. You want to erase us? Naruto challenged, the light of the sphere blinding even the erasers. Try erasing the hope of 6 worlds. He slammed the sphere into the giant eraser. The explosion wasn't loud, it was a symphony of color. The prismatic wave rolled outward, washing over the Ethelgard. Where it touched an eraser, the marble shattered not into dust, but into vibrant, living matter, flowers, water, and sparks of light. The white void in the sky recoiled, the unzipped reality stitching itself back together as E-Council's influence was pushed back by the sheer density of Naruto's bonds. The battle ceased. The silence returned, but this time it was peaceful. The queens stood panting, their marks glowing with a fierce, defiant light. We held them off, Kuria whispered, looking at the crimson roses blooming in the cracks of the plaza. For now, Alara said, appearing from the mist, her form more solid than ever. But the council knows now that you are not just a king, Naruto. You are a threat to their entire philosophy of isolation. They will not send soldiers next time. They will send a deceiver, one who can tear the Union apart from the inside. Naruto looked at his queens. They were bruised, their dresses and armor torn, but their eyes were fixed on him with a devotion that bordered on the divine. Let them try, Naruto said, his gaze turning toward the infinite portals. I've dealt with snakes before. But first, we need to find the 7th pillar. I can feel the Ethelgard tilting. We're missing the heart of the North. End of Chapter 9. Chapter 10. The Frozen Heart of the North. The Ethelgard was no longer a static palace, it was an evolving organism. With the Council of Shards' first crusade repelled, the air crackled with a new kind of tension, the silence of a predator rethinking its approach. Naruto stood at the edge of the northern parapet, staring into a swirling vortex of white frost. The palace felt unbalanced, as if it were leaning toward a void that hadn't been filled. The resonance is off, X-99 stated, her sapphire eyes scanning the structural integrity of the nexus. The spatial equilibrium of the Union requires a 7th anchor. Without it, the energy generated by the 6 of us will eventually cause a core meltdown. We are too much power for an incomplete vessel. The North, Naruto murmured, the cold wind from the rift biting at his cheeks. Alara, what's waiting for us in there? The celestial guide appeared, her robes billowing in the frigid draft. The realm of Boreas, a world that was once the library of the multiverse. But it has been plunged into a great winter. The pillar there is Esdeath, the general of the infinite frost. She did not fall to the void, she conquered it. She has turned her entire world into a graveyard of ice, where only the strong are allowed to breathe. A general, huh? Naruto adjusted his collar. Sounds like she's not the type to ask for help. She won't ask, Kuria added, her rose vines twitching. She'll try to put a collar on you, king. I've heard of her across the dark channels. She believes love is a weakness and power is the only truth. Quote, sounds like someone I used to know, Naruto said, a flash of Sasuke's old glare crossing his mind. I'm going. This balance issue isn't going to fix itself. He leapt into the blizzard. Naruto landed in a wasteland of jagged ice needles. The sky was a bruised charcoal gray, and the wind howled like a dying beast. In the distance, a fortress made of translucent blue ice rose like a jagged tooth. He didn't have to walk far before the ground erupted. Hundreds of ice soldiers, sculpted with terrifying detail, rose from the permafrost, their spears leveled at his heart. Step aside, Naruto said, his voice carrying through the gale. I'm here to talk to your general. The ice soldiers didn't move. Instead, the air in front of them crystallized, forming a staircase of frost. Descending the stairs was a woman whose presence made the sub-zero temperatures feel warm by comparison. She wore a high-collared white uniform, her long, flowing hair the color of a frozen glacier. Her eyes were a piercing, ruthless blue. Talk, Esdeath laughed, a sound like glass breaking. In this world, we don't talk to intruders. We brand them. You carry a lot of heat, boy. It's offensive to my tundra. I'm Naruto Uzumaki, he said, flaring his golden chakra to push back the encroaching frost. And your tundra is throwing the whole multiverse out of whack. I need you to join the Union. Esdeath's eyes narrowed, then widened with a predatory hunger. The Eternal King, I've heard the whispers. They say you've tamed the fire of the phoenix and the pride of the Empress. But I am not a bird to be caged or a queen to be courted. I am the storm. She raised a hand, and the very concept of time seemed to freeze. Mahapadma. The world turned monochromatic. The wind stopped. The snowflakes hung in the air like diamonds. Esdeath moved through the frozen time with casual grace, an ice blade forming in her hand. She aimed for Naruto's throat, intended to claim his head as her ultimate trophy. But as the blade touched the golden glow of his neck, it shattered. Naruto's eyes shifted, the orange of the fox and the cross of the sage glowing even in the frozen time. You can't freeze a bond. Esdeath. My soul is tethered to 6 other worlds. To stop me, you'd have to stop the heartbeats of everyone I'm protecting. He moved, his hand catching her wrist. E-color returned to the world with a violent thud. The shockwave of the temporal restart shattered the ice soldiers for miles. Esdeath gasped, her back hitting the frozen ground as Naruto pinned her. His chakra burning like a miniature sun over her. You moved in my frozen world. I've felt colder silences than yours, Naruto said, his face inches from hers. You're not strong because you're cold, Esdeath. You're cold because you're afraid that if you let anyone in, you'll melt away. But look at me, I'm burning, and I'm still standing. Esdeath stared up at him. For the first time in her life, she felt a power that didn't want to conquer her, but to encompass her. The survival of the fittest doctrine that had ruled her soul cracked. If he was the strongest, then by her own law, she belonged at his side. A king who can outrun time, she whispered, a dark, manic smile spreading across her face. Fine, if you can handle the frost without shattering, I will be your winter. The mark of the whirlpool appeared on her thigh, glowing with a frigid, electric blue. As the bond solidified, the Ethelgard underwent its final transformation. A massive, crystalline spire of ice rose in the north, perfectly balancing the palace. The tilt vanished. The union was complete. Naruto stood with his 7 queens. The 7 pillars of the multiverse were now one. But as they looked out from the balanced palace, a single black feather drifted down from the sky. The deceiver had arrived. End of Chapter 10. Chapter 11. The Serpent in the Garden. The Ethelgard had reached its zenith. With Esdeath's integration, the palace was no longer just a fortress, it was a cosmic clockwork of perfect harmony. The 7 pillars, the blade, the flame, the sea, the logic, the empress, the rose, and the frost, circulated their power through Naruto, making his golden shroud shine with a white, transcendental light. But perfection is a target. Naruto sat upon the central throne, his eyes closed as he felt the lifelines of 7 universes pulsing in his veins. Suddenly, a cold, oily sensation slid across his mind. It wasn't a frontal assault like the erasers. It was a whisper, a doubt. Are they truly yours, Naruto? Or are they just bound by the mark? Naruto's eyes snapped open. Standing in the center of the hall was a man who didn't belong to any of the 7 worlds. He was tall, pale, with long black hair and golden slitting eyes that looked like a snake's. He wore the robes of the council, but he moved with a fluid, predatory grace that Naruto knew all too well. Orochimaru, Naruto hissed, his hand tightening on the arm of the throne. Not exactly, Naruto-kun, the figure smiled, flicking a long tongue over his lips. I am the deceiver, a shard of the great serpent. The council realized that they couldn't break your walls, so they sent me to find the cracks in your heart. Before Naruto could summon his queens, the deceiver waved a hand. A dark, misty veil fell over the palace, separating the queens into isolated chambers of shadow. Let us see how strong these bonds are when faced with the truth, the deceiver murmured. Naruto found himself standing in a void. One by one, visions of his queens appeared before him, but they were distorted. He saw Arturia, but she was looking at him with resentment, her silver armor rusting. You took my duty and turned it into a leash, her vision spat. He saw Solara, her fire dimming to a cold gray. I am just a battery for your throne, she whispered. The deceiver circled Naruto, his voice a constant hiss. You call it a union. I call it a collection. You are the eternal king of a harem, but do you even know their names? Or are they just symbols to you? Pillars to hold up your ego? Naruto felt a seed of doubt sprout. He had moved so fast, leaping from world to world, saving them and moving on. Did he truly know Arturia's favorite color? Did he know what Mizuki dreamt of when she wasn't drowning in grief? The Harem King is a lonely title, Naruto. The deceiver whispered, leaning in close. They don't love you. They love the safety you provide. The moment a stronger king appears, they will leave you as quickly as they joined you. The darkness began to press in. Naruto's golden cloak flickered. The marks on his queens began to dim, their connection to the Ethelbert fraying as the deceiver's poison seeped in. Oh, the conceptual foundation of the union. You're wrong, Naruto whispered, his voice trembling. Am I? Look at them. The visions shifted. He saw Hinata and Sakura back in the prime reality, weeping. Because he had left them for a multiverse. He saw the faces of every person he had saved, only to realize he had moved on to the next world without a second look. You're a nomad of the heart, Naruto. You don't build homes. You build monuments to your own heroism. Naruto dropped to one knee. The weight of the 7 worlds felt like lead. But then, inside his mind, a massive tail slammed against the floor of his psyche. Oi, brat, stop listening to the snake. Kurama's roar shattered the silence of the void. You didn't save them because you wanted to be a king. You saved them because you couldn't stand to see them alone. That's who you are. Naruto's eyes cleared. He remembered the feeling of Arturia's hand in his, not as a pillar, but as a person. He remembered Solara's sob, Mizuki's first tear, and Esdeath's manic. Genuine smile. It's not about the title, Naruto said, his voice regaining its resonance. He stood up, and his chakra didn't just glow, it exploded outward in a wave of pure, honest heat. And it's not about the mark. I didn't give them those marks to own them. I gave them those marks so they'd never have to be alone again. He reached out through the darkness, not with power, but with a call. Arturia, Solara, all of you, don't listen to the shadows. I'm here. Across the palace, the 7 queens heard his voice, not as a command, but as a plea from a friend. Their own doubts shattered. They didn't need a king, they needed their Naruto. The dark veil tore. The 7 queens broke through their illusory prisons, their marks burning brighter than ever before. They surrounded the deceiver, their combined presence forcing the snake-like entity to shrink back. The union isn't a cage, Arturia declared, her silver sword glowing with the light of 1,000 moons. It's a choice. And we choose him, Hancock added, her eyes flashing with a royal fury. The deceiver hissed, his form beginning to dissolve. The council will not be pleased. You have turned a strategic asset into a soul bond. You are becoming something they cannot calculate. Tell them to stop calculating, Naruto said, standing among his 7 queens. And start worrying. The deck, Ivor vanished into a puff of black smoke. The Ethelbird settled, the air feeling cleaner than before. But Naruto knew the deceiver had left one truth behind. The council was no longer trying to stop him. They were preparing to erase the very concept of the multiverse itself to ensure he had nothing left to rule. We have to go to them, Naruto said, looking at the white void in the sky. Before they pull the plug on everything. End of Chapter 11. Chapter 12. The White Horizon. The Ethelgard was no longer a palace of peace, it had become a warship of the soul. The 7th dimensional balance was perfect. Yet the sky above the nexus had turned into a terrifying, blank canvas of absolute white. The White Horizon was the Council of Shards' ultimate weapon, the erasure of context. They weren't just destroying worlds anymore. They were bleaching the meaning out of existence, turning stories into empty pages. The council has retreated to the core of the first script, Alara explained, her celestial form flickering like a dying star. Her skin was becoming translucent as the very concept of a guide was being erased by the white void. It is the origin point of all realities. If they complete the Great Bleach, the multiverse will return to a state of before, no heroes, no villains, no bonds. Just nothingness. Naruto stood at the prow of the Ethelgard's central spire, his gold cloak now infused with the shimmering colors of his 7 queens. He felt their presence behind him, a phalanx of the most powerful women in existence. We aren't going to let them hit the reset button, Naruto said. his voice echoing with the authority of the Eternal King. X99, can we bridge the gap to the core? The Empress of Logic stepped forward, her sapphire eyes streaming with lines of code that were rapidly disappearing. The mathematical probability of a successful bridge is 0.0001%. But as you once said, King Naruto, logic is only the floor. The ceiling is whatever we decide to break through. I have calculated a way to use our combined resonance to pierce the white horizon. Then do it, Naruto commanded. The 7 queens formed a circle around Naruto. They joined hands, and the Ethelgard began to vibrate with a frequency that transcended sound. Arturia's silver light, Solara's fire, Mizuki's water, X99's neon data, Hancock's royal purple, Kuria's crimson roses, and ESD. Eth's blue frost all funneled into Naruto's center. Union Sovereign, Bridge of the Infinite. Naruto roared. A beam of prismatic energy shot from the palace, tearing through the white void like a needle through a shroud. The Ethelgard surged forward, entering the breach. They emerged in a realm that defied physics. It was a vast, infinite library where the books were actually glowing spheres of light, entire universes stored as data. In the center of this library stood the Council of Shards, 12 hooded figures made of pure, crystalline light, hovering around a giant golden quill that was currently dripping white ink over the spheres. The anomaly has arrived, the lead counselor spoke, his voice sounding like the collective sigh of a dying star. You bring the noise of 1,000 worlds into our silence, Naruto Uzumaki. You bring the mess of love into our perfect order. Your order is just a fancy word for a graveyard. Naruto shouted, leaping from the balcony of the Ethel Garden landing on the glass floor of the core. His queens followed, landing in a perfect defensive formation. A world without bonds isn't a world, it's just a void with a different name. Bonds are the source of suffering. Another counselor countered. By isolating the shards, we prevent the friction that leads to war, to grief, to loss. You seek to unite them, which will only lead to a singular massive tragedy when you eventually fail. Then let it be a tragedy. Naruto countered, his chakra flaring into a massive, 9-tailed avatar of prismatic light. At least we'll have lived. At least we'll have felt something. Erase the king, the counselors commanded in unison. The golden quill turned toward Naruto, and a wave of pure nothing swept toward them. It was a wave that didn't kill. It simply made things never have existed. Arturia stepped forward, her sword raised. My king's story will not be forgotten. She swung her blade, her lunar energy clashing with the white ink. Lding the wave back with sheer martial will. Solara and Esdeath combined their powers, creating a storm of fire and ice that acted as a barrier of existence against the nothing. Mizuki and Kuria wove a net of water and thorns to catch the flying shards of erased realities, while Hancock and X99 targeted the counselors themselves with beams of petrifying light and disruptive code. Naruto, go for the quill, Arturia screamed, her silver armor cracking under the pressure of the erasure. Naruto didn't hesitate. He entered the 6 paths, Eternal Union mode. His body became a silhouette of the entire multiverse. Stars twinkling in his skin, galaxies swirling in his eyes. He moved with a speed that bypassed the concept of time, appearing directly in front of the Great Quill. You're just a tool, Naruto said, grabbing the massive golden object with his bare hands. But I'm the one who writes the ending. He didn't break the quill. He poured his own chakra into it, the chakra of a boy who was once hated, who found friends, who found love, and who became a king. He forced the quill to start writing again, not in white ink, but in the vibrant, messy colors of the 7 worlds. The Kunk, Eilers shrieked as the core began to destabilize. The nothing was being replaced by everything. The bleached spheres began to glow with their original colors again, their stories restored and strengthened by the Union's energy. The script is changing, the lead counselor wailed. The isolation is over. Believe it, Naruto yelled, snapping the quill in half and unleashing a final, blinding burst of prismatic light that consumed the core. When the light faded, the Ethelgard was back in its rightful place in the center of the multiverse. The white void was gone, replaced by a sky filled with infinite, healthy stars. But as Naruto looked at his hands, he saw that he was beginning to fade. Naruto, Hinata's voice suddenly echoed from the prime reality, sounding closer than ever. The price of rewriting the script, Alara whispered, appearing one last time. To save the multiverse, you had to become a part of its permanent fabric. You are no longer just a man, Naruto. You are the Eternal King, but to maintain the union, you must now choose. Stay in the Ethelgard forever, or return to your home and let the union drift. Naruto looked at his 7 queens, who were watching him with bated breath. He looked at the portals to the prime reality, where his old life waited. A king doesn't abandon his people, Naruto said, his form solidifying once more. And a man doesn't abandon his family. We're staying. All of us. We're going to build a new multiverse, right here. The 7 queens let out a collective breath and knelt before him, not as subjects, but as his heart. The Eternal Harem King had secured his throne. But the real work, the work of living, was just beginning. End of Chapter 12. Chapter 13. The Genesis of the New Heavens. The core of the first script had been shattered, and in its place, a new reality began to bloom, one where the walls between dimensions were no longer prisons, but doorways. The Ethelgard had expanded beyond the limits of a palace, it was now a sprawling, celestial continent that served as the heart of the newly unified multiverse. Naruto stood upon the zenith spire, his gaze sweeping over the horizon where the 7 worlds met. To the north, the frozen fortresses of Estheth's realm shimmered like diamonds against the sky. To the south, the warm, tropical winds of Hancock's seas carried the scent of salt and adventure. The discord of old multiverse had been replaced by a low, humming harmony. The stabilization is complete, X99 said, stepping onto the balcony. Her synthetic skin now had a warm, pearlescent glow, and her sapphire eyes reflected a depth of emotion her old programming could never have simulated. The white bleach has been reversed. Every world in the Union is now experiencing a renaissance of growth. We are no longer just surviving. We are flourishing. Naruto turned to her, his expression softened. He no longer wore the orange jumpsuit of a ninja. Instead, he was draped in a cloak of liquid starlight tea. Had shifted through the colors of his 7 queens. It feels quiet. For the first time in my life, there isn't a war to fight or a seal to hold. It is the quiet of a beginning, not an end, Arturia said, joining them. She had traded her battle-scarred plate for a lighter, ceremonial silver armor that moved like water. But a king's peace is more demanding than his wars. The people of the 7 worlds are starting to interact. We have trade fleets from the Silver Moon landing in the ports of the Kuja. We have the technicians of the Clockwork Sector helping to irrigate the deserts of the Black Rose. It's a mess, isn't it? Naruto grinned, that familiar, fox-like spark returning to his eyes. A beautiful mess, Solara chimed in, landing on the balcony in a swirl of embers. She looked invigorated, her phoenix fire burning with a steady, nurturing gold. But we have a problem, Naruto. The Union is attracting attention from the outer void, the places the Council of Shards never reached. There are entities out there that haven't seen a sun in eons, and they're hungry for our light. Naruto's smile didn't fade, it sharpened. Then we give them a show. But first, we need to formalize the Union. If we're going to be a family, we need to stop living in separate wings of the palace. He gathered his 7 queens in the great hall of the Ethelgard. The room was a masterpiece of unified architecture, pillars of ice and flame supporting a ceiling of shifting digital code and starlight. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what it means to be a king, Naruto addressed them, standing at the head of the long obsidian table. In the leaf, the Hokage is the one who carries the burden of everyone's dreams. But here, I'm not just carrying your dreams. You're carrying mine. We are a union because we choose to be together. He reached into the air, and through the power of the broken script, he manifested 7 rings of pure, condensed chakra. Each ring was unique, one of silver, one of fire, one of turquoise water, one of neon light, one of royal violet, one of crimson rose gold, and one of eternal frost. These aren't just symbols of authority, Naruto said, his voice resonant with the power of the multiverse. They are tethers. They allow you to draw on my power, and me to draw on yours, no matter where we are in the stars. We are the 8 pillars now. As he placed the rings on their fingers, the Ethelgard underwent its final, most magnificent transformation. The palace didn't just grow, it pulsed with a heartbeat. The marks of the whirlpool on each of the queens' bodies flared, then settled into a permanent, glowing gold. The Eternal Harem, Kuria whispered, looking at her rose gold ring. I used to think that word meant something different, something smaller. In this world, Naruto said, taking his seat at the center of the table, it means a bond that can't be broken by time, space, or even the council themselves. It means that as long as one of us stands, the multiverse lives. But as the ceremony concluded, the great hall's windows suddenly darkened. A thick, viscous blackness began to press against the glass, not the white of the council, but a heavy, primordial dark. The outer void, Mizuki whispered, her hand moving instinctively to the water in the air. It's here, let it come, Esdeath said, a manic, predatory glint in her blue eyes. She slammed her hand onto the table, and a wave of frost reinforced the windows. I was getting bored with all this peace. Naruto stood up, his cloak flaring into a brilliant, prismatic sun. The first test of the new heavens. Everyone, to your stations. Let's show the void what happens when you try to put out a fire that spans 7 worlds. The Ethelgerd began to ascend, leaving the atmosphere of the central world and heading toward the dark frontier of the multiverse. The king and his queens were no longer just protectors of their own realms, they were the vanguards of a new era. End of Chapter 13. Chapter 14. The Siege of the Primordial Night. The Ethelgerd did not just float, it roared through the subspace between realities like a celestial chariot. The darkness pressing against the palace windows was not merely an absence of light, it was the entropics, beings from the 0 point, who predated the first script of the multiverse. They were the shadows cast by existence itself, and they had come to reclaim the light Naruto had stolen from the void. Visual sensors are failing, X99 shouted over the screaming of the palace's structural supports. Her neon blue hair was sparking with static. The darkness is eating the very concept of distance. They aren't approaching us, they are overlapping with us. Naruto stood on the bridge of the Ethelgerd, his feet planted wide as the palace bucked. Mizuki, Esdeath, stabilize the outer hall. Don't let the darkness seep into the air supply. The Empress of the Abyss and the General of Frost moved in perfect synchronization. Mizuki channeled the infinite pressure of her oceans into a protective layer of heavy water that coated the palace, while Esdeath instantly froze it into a shell of absolute zero ice. The result was a diamond-hard barrier that vibrated with the impact of the entropic shadows. Outside, the void began to take shape. Colossal, tentacled horrors made of non-matter lashed out, their touch causing the marble of the palace to dissolve into gray ash. They're trying to starve us out, Hancock hissed, her hand glowing with a royal violet hockey that she projected through the ice shell. Why want us to flicker out like a candle in a storm? Then we become a bonfire, Naruto said. He looked at Solara and Kuria. The rose and the flame. We need a signal, something to tell the rest of the multiverse that the king is still standing. Solara gripped Naruto's hand, her phoenix heat intensifying. Kuria wrapped her rose vines around their locked palms. We'll give them a star, they said in unison. Naruto channeled his 6 paths chakra into the 2 queens. A massive pillar of crimson gold fire erupted from the zenith spire, piercing through the ice shell and tearing into the heart of the entropic swarm. The darkness shrieked, a sound that vibrated in the souls of every living being across the 7 worlds. The light revealed the face of their enemy, the Void Herald, a creature the eyes of a moon with 1,000 weeping eyes. Eternal King, the herald's voice echoed through the bridge, bypassing the vacuum of space. You have built a lighthouse in a sea that was meant to be dark. Your union is a crime against the natural end of all things. We are the silence. We are the rest. Let us consume you. I've never been much for sleeping early, Naruto quipped, though his brow was drenched in sweat. The strain of powering the Ethelgerd and the Union rings simultaneously was beginning to crack his golden shroud. Naruto, your chakra levels are fluctuating, Arturia cried, her hand on his shoulder to steady him. The rings, they're drawing too much. You're trying to sustain 7 universes while fighting a god of the void. I can handle it, Naruto gritted his teeth, his eyes turning a fierce blood red as Kurama's chakra surged to meet the demand. No, you can't, brat. Kurama roared within his mind. You're the king, but you're still a man. You're trying to be the engine and the fuel at the same time. Let the queens lead. Trust the union. Naruto looked at his 7 queens. They weren't just standing behind him, they were leaning into the storm, their own spirits flaring. You're right, Kurama, Naruto whispered. He let go of the central control orb. Everyone, don't just take my power. Give it back. Complete the circuit. The 7 queens understood instantly. They formed a circle around Naruto, placing their hands on his back and shoulders. The rings on their fingers began to glow with an interconnected light, forming a geometric pattern of infinite energy, the octagon of the Eternal King. The power no longer flowed from Naruto, it flowed through all of them in a continuous loop. The exhaustion vanished, replaced by a sense of omnipotence. Now, Naruto commanded, Union Art, the sovereign's judgment. The Ethelgard didn't just fire a beam, the entire palace transformed into a projectile of pure, conceptual light. It slammed into the Void Herald, not with physical force, but with the combined history and hope of 7 worlds. The Herald's 1,000 eyes closed as the light of the Union burned through its non-matter heart. The entropic swarm disintegrated, turned back into the harmless dust of space. The darkness receded, revealing the true horizon of the multiverse, a beautiful, endless expanse of stars that were no longer afraid of the dark. The Ethelgard came to a halt. The palace was battered, the ice shell melting away to reveal the scarred but standing marble. Naruto collapsed to his knees, his queens falling with him, all of them laughing and gasping for air. They were covered in soot and frost, their royal robes torn, but their bonds were now forged in the fire of a cosmic war. We did it, Mizuki whispered, leaning her head on Naruto's shoulder. We did, Naruto said, looking at his hand. The golden ring on his finger was no longer just a ring, it was a part of his skin. But as they celebrated, a strange chime echoed through the bridge. It was a sound Naruto hadn't heard in years. It was the sound of a bell, the bell from the Team 7 survival test. A final portal opened in the center of the bridge. It didn't lead to a new world or a void. It led to a simple, wooden bridge in a village hidden in the leaves. One final task, King Naruto, Alara's voice whispered from the fading light of the herald. The king must reconcile with the boy. To rule the future, you must say goodbye to the past. Naruto stood up, his gaze fixed on the portal. Wait for me here, he told his queens. I have to finish where it all started. End of chapter 14. Chapter 15. The King's Homecoming. The bridge in the Hidden Leaf Village was exactly as he remembered it. The wooden planks groaned under his weight, and the morning mist clung to the surface of the river below. Naruto stood there, his liquid starlight cloak fading until he was once again wearing the simple, orange jumpsuit of his youth. The Ethelgard, his 7 queens, and the weight of the multiverse felt like a dream he had just woken from. Standing at the other end of the bridge were 2 figures, a younger version of himself, sitting on the railing with a lonely expression. In the shadow of the 4th Hokage, Minato Namikaze. So, the younger Naruto said, looking up with wide, blue eyes. Did we make it? Did we become Hokage? The Eternal King walked toward his younger self. His footsteps solid on the wood. We became something much bigger, Naruto. We became a bridge for everyone who was ever alone. We became a home for the homeless across the stars. Minato smiled, his form translucent but warm. You've carried the name of the Uzumaki further than I ever dreamed, son. But the multiverse doesn't need a ruler. It needs an anchor. Are you ready to be that anchor forever? Naruto looked back at the portal shimmering behind him. He could see his queens, Arturia's silver hair, Solara's golden fire, the sapphire eyes of X99. They were waiting for him. They were his reality now. I'm ready, Naruto said. He reached out and ruffled the hair of the younger Naruto. Don't worry, kid, it gets better. You're gonna have a family that stretches to the ends of existence. The younger version of himself grinned, then vanished into a swirl of golden leaves. Minato nodded one last time and faded into the mist. Naruto turned back to the portal. As he stepped through, the bridge of Konoha dissolved into the stars. He emerged back on the throne of the Ethelgard. His 7 queens were standing in a semicircle, their expressions filled with a mixture of relief and eternal devotion. The palace was no longer just a fortress or a warship, it was a sanctuary. Is it done? Arturia asked, stepping forward to take his hand. Yeah, Naruto said, his voice deep and resonant. The past is at peace. The future is ours. He looked out from the zenith spire. Across the infinite expanse, the 7 worlds were visible, glowing like jewels in the dark. He could feel every heartbeat, every breath, and every dream in his union. He was the Eternal Harem King, not by conquest, but by the undeniable gravity of his heart. So, Hancock said, leaning against his shoulder with a confident smirk. What does the king do now that the multiverse is saved? Naruto sat back on his throne, his 7 queens surrounding him in a tableau of divine power and beauty. He looked at the infinite portals waiting to be explored, the new stories waiting to be written, and the eternal life they would share together. Now, Naruto grinned, and for a moment, the whiskers on his face glowed with a mischievous Golden light. Now, we live. Believe it. The Ethelgard pulsed with a final, blinding light, becoming a permanent sun in the center of the multiverse, a beacon of union that would never, ever go out. End of chapter 15. The will of fire does not end with one story. It lives on in every choice, every sacrifice, and every legend yet to be written. If you enjoyed this alternate destiny, subscribe to Will of Fire Stories for more Naruto what-ifs, forbidden timelines, and legendary reigns. Until the next story, keep the will of fire alive.